on to one of my favorite topics, and one I think is yours too, because we've both done this for a living.
You know, I'm excited about this topic too, is because what we're going to build, we did it kind of almost independently, but through collaborative thinking.
It's amazing.
And they all kind of sync up, actually.
We've worked together, we've worked and known each other for more than almost a decade.
Yeah.
And we independently built our organizations, and over the years as we've compared, it's almost always the same derivation.
That's right. Now I'm going to have to confession here. I like your graph much better than my
graph.
Well, so I'm going to steal that.
More artistic.
So here we go. Possibly.
But you're stronger than I am.
Yeah.
All right. So the Office of Data. What is the Office of Data? It's a huge question. You're a Chief Data Officer, have been.
Yep.
I'm a former Chief Data Officer, now a different thing.
Yep.
But building an organization that is devoted completely to data, just as the CFO is devoted to financials.
That's right.
And so we believe the Office of Data has a mandate to manage data just like the CFO manages financials.
Are the financials correct? Are the blue books correct? That's up to the CFO. How do they deploy capital? That's the CFO. How do we deploy data capital? That's part of our conversation.
How do we invest in data?
Where do we invest in data? The company doesn't say that. The CDO helps with that conversation.
So when you start thinking about it in that context, like there's a lot of nuances and things, and the machine is big. How do you put $1 in and get $2 out?
That's right.
If data is at the core. And so you and I have always called this the Office of Data, but the CDO role is sort of out there for us. We picked it up and said, okay, the market's going to a Chief Data Officer role. You and I have written some stuff over the years, though, that basically lays out what we think the Chief Data Officer's business mandate is.
That's right.
So what their real job is. And it's changed over the years with all the different regulatory releases and et cetera.
And it's probably changed a little since we've written our paper.
So let's walk through our definition of what is the Office of Data.
All right, let's do it.
And so given that we just started with the role, the CDO role, we also have this organization that sits right underneath of them called the Office of Data. And so in a second, we'll draw that construct out.
Do we need to put some rainbows? Like this is the pot at the end of the rainbow?
It's the pot, it's the gold. Yeah,
I like it.
It's a rim.
Yeah, that's a pretty good drawing.
Not intentional. All right, so we'll come back to what's the structure, what's the people structure of this. But let's think about the whole machine. What does the whole machine look like? And so every organization, any company, you can't just have people run around doing stuff, although a lot of companies do.
It's not scalable, though.
Yeah, a lot of, actually, this buzzword environment we're in do it a lot. They hire 172 data scientists that are sitting there.
You're throwing bodies at a problem with no strategy, and that's what we're getting with that.
Our view is that it requires every time, not just people, so this is the people component, but it also requires tools, and it requires process. And that's the three-legged stool that we've been hit over the head for so many years by all the big 8 consulting firms. Well, if you want to change anything, you just got to solve
people, process, and technology. I will tell you that this is all true, and I think it's great with data, but thinking of the big 8 firms that preach this, it gives me the heebie-jeebies a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's really right when it comes to how we're doing
so
this
how do
stuff.
you take it?
We can't do that.
How do you take it from being an executive tagline, a buzzword, to practical implementation?
That's right.
And so let's start to define these.
Actually, that's what we need to do in all this conversation is how to take a tagline and actually make it practical and usable.
That's exactly
Actually,
right.
that's what this job is.
At
the end of the day,
a very large part of that job.
This is the link between strategy and implementation.
So we'll talk about that in a few seconds with the change stuff. So tools. This is something we call as the Common Data Exchange. So Common Data Exchange is a collection of tools. Every company that I've worked in, and I think those that you've been involved in too, every one of them have some tools that are useful for this kind of work.
That's right.
I've never met one that has them all yet. They're always missing some piece or part.
Oh, yeah.
And so understanding the Common Data Exchange, and we're not going to go too deep into it because we'll talk about it in later segments, but Common Data Exchange really is, think of it as the New York Stock Exchange within your company, so that people have one place to supply data and consume data. And the only difference in one feature layer that we add on top of the New York Stock Exchange experience is we wrap it with an Amazon shopping and shipping type of experience, to where as a data scientist you can just search for things, natural language, that you're interested in, and it returned data products that you ship to R, you ship to Python, you ship to these
your
things.
cart.
You add it to your card, you blend it. So it's a whole collection of features that are super important to tie the supply activities of the business to the demand activities of analytics and data science. And we'll talk about data supply chain management in the next segment.
That's
The
right.
Common Data Exchange is a collection of features and tools to enable that.
Yep.
And so process, and we just mentioned this.
Side note, you know what I love about this though? What you didn't put here is BI tools. You didn't put Tableau. You didn't put business.
Who cares?
You know, because that's all part of the strategy, but that's not the strategy. That's
a
just
piece.
part of. It's just a piece of the
thing.
puzzle.
It's a
So
thing.
this is great. Traditionally, you'll see those tools here as the tool, or you'll see the database name as the
As
database,
the whole
as
thing.
tool, and those are just part of the strategy that we need to manage.
That's right. That's a good. So this is a collection of tools. And
Yep.
so process. So to have a process that's tied to this concept, we already defined it. It's data supply chain management. And I don't want to go too deep into this because we're going to cover it in later sections. But I do want to pay a little tribute to it because you and I share the same philosophy that if you go into any big business that's well run, there are business functional responsibilities. It's kind of this thing Ryan, we started talking about yesterday. You mentioned, well, if the business user thinks this or something to that effect, and Bob and I are like, whoa,
Who's that?
Time out. Define business user, please, because it's a thing that technologists do, and people in charge of building technologies, they over sort of generalize who are the consumers of their things. In the business world, I don't know. There's not a role called a business user.
No, there's
It's
accountants.
not a thing.
There's
accountants.
actuaries. You have
There's
sales
analysts.
team.
There's
analysts.
there's sales reps. There's sales analysts.
Yeah.
There's sales
Depart-
operations.
I
There's
view
all
them as
these-
departments.
And you and I, finance background, like what are those people doing? They're enabling some piece of the P&L.
They have to.
They're mapped to
One way or
they're
another.
Mapped to revenue, SG&A, COGS, tax. They're mapped to something that they're accountable for
That's
in the
right.
business model.
They have to be.
And so, bring it back to here. You and I believe that there's a missing function inside of companies that are essentially manufacturing facilities of data.
Yep.
So financial services, banks, insurance, anybody producing a ton of data, or i.e. they're a data-centric company, they're missing a function. And that function is data supply chain management. Just like there's supply chain that manages the physical goods and materials and things that we buy as an organization, there needs to be a business function that is solely accountable for the process of moving data from raw materials, i.e. it landed into the operational system, through enrichment. You know, we're making it more healthy, we're making it better, we're restructuring it, flattening it, into demand, where we're analyzing it and producing insights.
That's right.
So it's a business function.
So the part of me that's sad about this is I like this term much better than the way that I did it when I built my department.
Yeah.
Because it was the same concept. It was like, oh, here's your flow of your data. So look at the flow of the data, and
But
this is how I'm
practically,
staffing
that's
it.
what you built.
That's exactly it. Because here's the beginning of the data where it's created, and this is where it's consumed at the end, and this is how we staff it. So, I like that much better.
And what we often see at the executive level, like when you click into pick an organization and you step into it, you will see functional ownership of each part of the supply chain. So IT or technology or CTO
Yep.
will own supply side.
Yep.
And they'll have business partners that are associated with the products and the applications that they use.
Yep.
In the middle, oftentimes IT or architectural groups will own data warehouses, operational data
Yep.
stores, enrichment capabilities, et cetera. And on the right-hand side, it's a free-for-all.
Yeah.
Technology might own BI, but business might also own BI, or in many cases, they both own BI.
Yeah, some people are spinning up their own cubes in the
their own
business and
version,
stuff.
like,
Yeah, that's
so
right.
The point of that is, functionally and from an executive perspective, there is no single ownership of the supply chain.
That's right. That's right.
And so it's a missing function.
Who's seeing that? Because ownership is an illusion in that arena.
Yeah.
Really, like who owns the data? Who owns the technology? They all own bits and pieces of it. So when there's a problem, how do we fix it? There is no connection.
So each of those folks and each of those roles
There will be a
should
problem.
own those objects, as in this piece of technology I own.
Yeah.
But the data that is either the lifeblood or the artifact of that thing that's going to move through these stages of the supply chain, there's no central ownership of that.
That's right. And it's fluid.
And so,
Yep.
from our experience, it's very important to note that we believe that data supply chain management, brand new function, introducing it to the world, it's like when marketing was introduced many decades ago, and then before you knew it, everybody's got marketing, and it's becoming a sophisticated component to the business model. Data supply chain is going to become that over time. And the important thing about this group is that it isn't just business or just IT. You need people that have technical understanding and business understanding together.
Well, how do you bring those together?
And so that's the goal. And we're going to talk about that in future segments.
That's right, we will.
But it's a really important thing because I see a lot when I talk with clients, this segmentation and pitting against each other of, well, IT does it this way and business does it. No, we got to stop that.
That's
It's-
actually part of the problem.
It's part of the
legacy.
problem.
Yep.
We need to combine and
that
have
narrative.
centralized, focused, and goals and allocating
Yep.
work.
So if this is how you would break down the Office of Data or Chief Data Officer in an ideal environment where a Chief Data Officer was here with these powers, what would the CIO or CTO's responsibilities be?
So CIO, CTO, right? So they're in charge of the infrastructure, make sure the servers are running. They're also in charge of the expense management of that, so they have to, make it at the optimal level. They're in charge of the actual app dev. So I'm a big believer in you have to define what your roles and responsibilities are. So the CTO, the CIO, their capabilities come up from a technician perspective. So they're thinking in terms of technical architecture, whatnot. The CDO is not really a technician. So I think I said this to you earlier. So if I'm going to be a CFO of a company, I should know how to do accounting. If I'm going to be a chief marketing officer, I should know how to sell and market. You need that competent, that experience. If you want to be a CDO, you need to know how to do data analytics. You need to know the science behind that, but can communicate that. And I think we're going to drill down into the CDO's role a little bit later versus the Office of Data. So the CIO then, they knew the technical aspect. Most of them have grown up through the technical shop. How do I manage data from a technical perspective? How do I move data from a technical point of view? The CDO needs to partner with that just as well as the CDO needs to partner with marketing, needs to partner with where we're going from a business objective, and needs to be able to tell that story, to collaborate that, to bring the teams together. The CIO is an old job and is not fully bringing the teams together. Why are we talking today? They're not managing data because data is much more fluid, partly because of how technology changed. Technology created this problem with Hadoop and stuff like that. So it's a completely different role. And but Ruben has a better, easier way to say it than me.
No, it's great.
No, not easier. It's just to add to it, embellish, and we're both math guys, so it's all our entire, all we ever do really, when we work together is try to turn something into an equation.
Yeah.
And so it's just breaking down the
Ironically,
pieces.
my whole life is equation. I'm actually predicting your behavior based on the way your face looks. Your expressions.
One of my former jobs, the actual job title was figure out how the world's working right now.
Yeah, that's right.
It's just find the variables. And so, to your question, just find the variables. And so, you got to respect that data is like water. So data.
We're getting Bruce Lee on this.
Data. Yeah, well,
It's like kung fu.
I'm
It's
not doing
water.
any kung fu. I'll pull something.
It
Data is
changes
like
shape.
water. Data can be in a solid state. It can be in a gaseous or a steam state. It can be in a fluid state. And data can exist in those states. And in certain circumstances, it will be floating between the three based on different temperature intervals, right?
Yep, that's right.
Data is just like it. And there's a whole bunch of other analogies we can use, but I love water.
I do too.
And so, to play on what Bob said, let's translate that to what that really means. Data lives physically. In any company, it lives physically. It's in databases and data stores, whether it's on the cloud or on-prem. It's physically there. You can go look at it, download it. Logically, we can structure it, relate it, and model it. We can watch how it moves from semantic context to semantic context to semantic context across applications. And so we can logically kind of see how's data structured in a thing, a database, or an organization. And then conceptually, how does it live in the minds of the people, the consumers, those people that are building logical models, and then those people that are building physical data stores. And so data lives conceptually, logically, and physically. And so your question, what does the CTO do versus what does a chief data officer do? The CTO and CIO should still own, in my opinion, physical.
They have to.
Because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of cost associated to that. There's a lot of technical DBA types of administration going on with that thing. Where the CDO really needs to step in is defined ownership and what it means to have logical understanding of data and all the metadata required to manage that. And the same with conceptual integration back into the business to ensure we're constantly getting conceptual metadata from our business and consumers alike. But that's not it. And this is probably the most important thing and the most overlooked and the most abstract thing. If you allow these things to be each independently owned by different groups, which is what's happening today, architecture owns logical and they end up building data models and things of that nature. Business people are doing whatever they want to do. The other component of this office of data construct is that they own the relationships between logical to physical and conceptual to logical. So it's not just each of the objects, so we draw these as a circle, it's the lines that connect them to the underlying physical reality. And so there's a very simple and super abstract metric that Bob and I are still working. We're actually working on a very sophisticated model to help explain this, but we've yet to really do it at scale. But in principle, it's absolutely true. And so George Soros, one of the greatest hedge fund investors of all time, puts his entire strategy and philosophy of investment really wrapped into the idea of reflexivity. And so this notion that there can be madness of crowds and exuberance, which drives market price extremely high, all the while there's intrinsic value at the bottom, and over time, as feedback loops test the reality to the market price, the feedback loops have a potential of giving false positives, and so the exuberance grows. And so the distance of reality to perception is called reflexivity. And so one of the things that you got to always be thinking about, and this is a long-winded answer to a fairly straightforward question, but it's a gotcha, and it's something I think organizations don't look at a lot. When you put all of these roles and components into each individual lieutenants and individual owners, you miss the ability to measure reflexivity. So business reality is happening up here. This is absolutely true. The real world is happening. We are figuring out how to drive P&L and to optimize profit. It's always what we're doing. And there is some exuberance or activity, i.e. market price, that's always happening here. So if we're saying that data is like the market, we've got reality occurring here and some version of reality occurring here. And it's always a little bit lagged. So the business requirements result in a physical thing being created. And so it's always a little bit behind. But there's an opportunity to measure the distance between reality and perception, and that is a form of reflexivity. And we see a lot. So we haven't quantified it yet, but we feel it. The distance between reality and perception, how disconnected the conceptual things are to the actual physical data, it's significant. And the more distant that is, the less control we have on the ecosystem. The more cost, the more risky, the more, et cetera. Go ahead.
So as a CDO, though, one of my roles, and this is a nice way of putting it, is to shrink that distance. We need to create that ecosystem where everybody is aligned from a collaboration point of view. And we're going to talk about change later in an earlier chapter, which we went over real quickly. We're going to talk about the data savvy executive, and I think this is where we're going to drill down into this conversation a little bit. So we manage that distance from reality versus perception and wrap that with where we're going from a business perspective.
So, no, that's great. And so in terms of, one of the things you're talking about, the opportunity to manage there is cost, right? And so if I'm a CEO, maybe I think, I already have a CIO, I already have a CTO, now I'm going to add a CDO. That just sounds like a whole nother budget, more cost, more things I have to go buy, more things I have to go do.
And that's a true statement. You probably see that in your life.
Or
Yeah.
sometimes it's true. Sometimes it's, maybe we edit this out, but grow a pair, take some budget from other people that shouldn't be pissing away the money.
Yeah, so what's the ROI on capturing that reflexivity? In terms of cost, what are some real examples of how you can
really
protect against certain things?
The ROI is, well, first of all, I found on my experience just going in and helping lots of Fortune 50, 100, 500, 1,000 companies deal with this stuff. There's about 30% of just pure raw waste sitting in COGS and SG&A that is tied to the manual manipulation and data prep and data engineering that's going on across the business.
Bloat.
It's just bloat. It's just there because we've not been managing it. Why have we not been managing it? Well, because we're not making transparent reflexivity. Well, why aren't we doing that? Because we don't have an ecosystem that enables us to actually measure these things. Well, why don't we have that? So because people aren't ready for it and they need some sort of pain index to help them change.
Pain is actually very critical for change when it comes to this conversation.
It's the driver, it's the catalyst.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I mean, again, if you don't know the pan is hot and you can't feel it, you just keep burning your hand.
That was the birth of my job, of where I
Yeah.
am now, is they were having pain. They're like, we need someone to manage it.
So ROI, the ROI almost always in year one of building an office of data, You should be building your strategy focused on cost optimization, but not fluffy, like soft benefit types of things. The goal should be, and we're going to talk about this when we get into data supply chain management, there are some business metrics that we should be measuring on our investment thesis into data. Things like the redundancy ratio. Are you 11 to 1? Are you 4 to 1? How redundant is your data footprint? And so go figure out how to calculate that. And by doing that, like going to figure out how to calculate it, you're actually going to end up building a lot of these things because it's not easy to calculate.
It's going to be kind of awesome too, because they're going to have this moment where they're like, oh shit, I don't even know how to do that, because how many redundancies do we have? I don't even have a tool
How do
to
you
do
define
that.
what's redundant?
How do you do that?
How do you know what's redundant?
I don't know.
And so it's a complicated.
How do you look at 11,000 data stores?
Which is pretty much everything, right?
Yeah,
All
yeah.
these things. The reason why data governance is so abstract is because nobody's really gone down the path of trying to make it non-abstract. Like take it all the way to bedrock and figure out how to actually do it at bedrock. And so back to your question, it's the first year or two should be cost driven, and it's going to be driven largely on data prep, data engineering activities where you got business people pulling off spreadsheets out of SAP or out of the warehouse or whatever it is, or they're going back to the sources, our actuarial friends.
Yep.
And they're doing their modeling, and they're spending 70% of their time doing that instead of feature engineering and doing analysis. And so that's year one. Year two gets into a different kind of problem where you've got analytical redundancy, where you've got now multiple groups producing the same analytics, coming up with slightly different numbers, which is really irritating. But the idea there is
irritating, but disrupting to the point that the organization is going to get sick of that.
Get sick of
And
it.
that's when the change
And it
starts.
happens.
That's I've seen that.
We've been sitting. You and I used to sit in
Yep.
front of a CEO, and I saw him a couple of times say, "Why is that number different than that number?"
Yeah, that's right.
And the moment they say that, nobody trusts anybody at that point.
Yep.
And so that analytical redundancy is another form of cost
control on it.
that
That's
hits
it.
SG&A in a significant way because those are very rarely cheap resources. And so that's some of the mentality of how do you fund it, how do you think about investing into it, and the thing that we can't stress enough is don't go just superficial on this. Don't think that you can just appoint some people and these things are going to start happening. Your goal as a new CDO, and we call it third gen CDO,
Yep.
should be to come in and create a scorecard for yourself that is quantitative in nature. And it should be looking at data redundancy ratio. It should be looking at cycle time to insights. From the moment we have an idea as a business to the moment we produce that insight and integrate it back in the business, what's the cycle time? Like these are management KPIs,
Yeah.
they're metrics.
So I like creating scorecards to review myself for myself. I'm like 100%.
Yeah.
That's how I do that.
So those metrics though, like asking, okay, redundancy ratio, well, what's the components to that? What are the variables? How would I calculate that?
Yeah.
That exercise will actually drive out your cost reduction opportunities.
Yeah, that's right.
Good question.